faithfully conveying value and interpreting great books from around the world. Hello, this is Sally's Book Talk. Today, the book we're interpreting for you is called Sentimental Education. The subtitle is A Story of a Young Man. The author is the famous French writer Gustave Flaubert. This is a story about a young Frenchman telling the tale of the protagonist Frédéric Moreau and his emotional entanglements with four women centered around Madame Arnoux. And this story originates from Flaubert's own emotional experiences. In 1836, Flaubert was 15 years old. He went with his parents to the French seaside city of Trouville for a vacation. One day, he saw a lady's coat on the beach, completely soaked by seawater. He picked it up and placed it in a dry spot. Someone told the coat's owner, Elisa, about this. Elisa found Flaubert and expressed her gratitude. With just one glance, he fell in love with this elegant lady. Our future great writer from then on kept this affection deeply hidden in his heart. 5 years later, 20-year-old Flaubert reunited with Elisa in Paris. He often visited her home. However, later, Elisa left France with her husband. 2 years later, in 1843, 22-year-old Flaubert created the first version of Sentimental Education based on this. However, this is not the book we're discussing today. Flaubert himself was dissatisfied with it and never published it. Another 3 years passed, and 25-year-old Flaubert reunited with Elisa again. He discovered that she now had white hair, and Flaubert was deeply moved. On one hand, he continued to keep the lady buried in his heart as a beautiful memory to cherish. On the other hand, he secretly resolved to write about the story that could have happened between them. And in 1869, Flaubert's novel Sentimental Education was published. He sent Elisa a copy. Elisa knew that Madame Arnoux in the book was herself. In a letter to a friend, Flaubert said, "Each of us has a locked room in our heart. I have sealed mine." So, however, he did not destroy this unfulfilled love. It remained deeply hidden in his heart. Sentimental Education is the opening of that locked room in his heart. Of course, as a writer with grand ambitions, Flaubert's vision and aspirations far surpass the scope of his personal life, extending to the core of the broader era. The 30 years from the initial encounter with Elisa in 1836 to the publication of Sentimental Education in 1869 enabled Flaubert to depict the era in which the novel's protagonist, Frédéric Moreau, lived. The story starts in 1840 and stretches all the way to 1867. Thus, the protagonist was able to experience the French February Revolution of 1848, witnessing the fall of the July monarchy, the transition to the French Second Republic. The 1848 Revolution is an important backdrop for Sentimental Education. In 1830, Louis Philippe became King of France, and the July monarchy he established faced various political pressures from the start. The old aristocratic Royalist Party and the Republican Party, made up of lawyers, journalists, students, and workers, were all unhappy with him. Entering the 1840s, Philippe's government prime minister colluded with capitalists and implemented authoritarian measures like suppressing free speech, banning public gatherings, and revising election laws, leading to a social crisis. In February 1848, workers and students gathered. They demanded reforms in the streets, singing the Marseillaise and burning debris. The National Guard was ordered to restore order on the streets, but these soldiers defected and joined the revolutionary forces. The CJ, although Louis Philippe took some emergency measures to resolve conflicts and appease the masses, it was too late. A provisional government was quickly established, announcing the creation of the French Second Republic. In Sentimental Education, young people love to debate and actively or passively participate in the revolutionary events of this era. Their stories are an integral part of the revolution in France during this period. In a way, the splendor and decline of their youth symbolize the rise and fall of the revolution. The story begins one day in 1840. 18-year-old Frédéric Moreau had just graduated from high school and was returning to his hometown for vacation. On the ship, he met the Arnoux family, who ran an art shop in Paris. Madame Arnoux' charm deeply attracted him, and he longed to get to know the couple better. Soon after, Moreau came to Paris to study law. After finding the address of Arnoux' art shop, he made various excuses to go there. Arnoux gradually accepted this young man and often invited Moreau to his family dinners. In Paris, Moreau also met many friends his age, all full of vigor and ideals. And the prosperity of Paris seemed to promise a bright future to the young people. Moreau's daily life involved two overlapping circles. One was his interactions with like-minded friends, and the other was his relationships with several women. First, let's talk about him and his friends, Moreau. In Paris, his friends include classmates from middle school, painters with artistic ideals, tabloid editors, young workers who dare to clash with the police, idlers who spend all day studying political news, and tutors who dream of socialist visions, among others. Moreau gathers with his friends every week at his rented house. Although their personalities and interests vary, they all hold dissatisfaction with the government. Each one feels they bear a great social mission and vaguely sense that a political storm is imminent. The most important among these friends is Deslauriers, Moreau's good friend from middle school. Back in school, they often took walks together, chatted, and aspired to study. Deslauriers was fascinated by philosophy and vowed to build an all-encompassing philosophical system, whereas Moreau liked romantic literature, loved painting, drama, and poetry, and aspired to pursue writing. When the two reunited in Paris, Deslauriers had abandoned his philosophical ideals. He wanted to rise to prominence quickly, but was hindered by his poor background and lack of connections. So, while studying law, he became passionate about researching social economy and the French Revolution, dreaming of one day becoming a deputy or minister, or even creating a political organization. Moreau, however, was completely different. After barely obtaining his law degree, he aspired to become a painter. Why? Because being a painter gave him an excuse to frequent Arnoux' art shop, giving him more opportunities to get close to Arnoux. And meanwhile, Moreau returned to his hometown and learned that his property was almost depleted. His mother tearfully told him of her hardships and loneliness, hoping he would stay in the countryside and work at a law firm. Moreau had no choice but to remain in the village. I wouldn't. He often thought of Paris and Madame Arnoux. The village neighbor, Old Man Roque, found out that Moreau's mother's surname was inherited from a noble family in the province. As long as it's confirmed by the Ministry of Justice, this noble title can be restored. Roque was the manager of the rural estates for the great Parisian banker, Monsieur d'Ambrose. This Monsieur d'Ambrose had intricate ties with the government, monopolized the tobacco business, and was preparing to monopolize the coal industry in France. Roque implied that through d'Ambrose's connections, he could help Moreau and his mother restore their noble title. Moreau had no interest in this. He passively lived a mediocre life, and Paris seemed to be forgotten by him. 5 years later, Moreau's uncle suddenly passed away, leaving him a huge inheritance. He immediately bid farewell to his mother and hurried back to Paris, reuniting with old friends and his close friend Deslauriers. By then, Deslauriers was completely devoted to revolution. His unrealized ambitions had made his views more radical. At one gathering, Deslauriers delivered a passionate speech. Is the press free? Are we free? Just to row a small boat in the river requires 28 procedures.
I'd rather live with men eating savages.
The government devours us. Philosophy, law, art, even the air we breathe, everything belongs to the government. And France lies dying under the boots of gendarmes and the cassocks of the church. Later, Deslauriers decided to start a newspaper, believing success could only come through his own efforts. And A newspaper could promote his ideas while attacking political opponents to vent his resentment. He hoped Moreau would fund him. Although Moreau agreed, he ultimately didn't fulfill the promise. Thus, the two friends parted on bad terms. Returning to Paris, Moreau became more pragmatic than before. He wanted to work at the Ministry of Justice and sought a recommendation from banker Dumbruz, forcing him to frequently attend Dumbruz's gatherings. And Moreau used to look down on Dumbruz's guests. But one day he unexpectedly encountered his old friend Martinon there, which changed his perspective. Somehow Martinon had become a regular at Dombruz's and secured a position at the Paris prosecutor's office. Moreau realized their friend group had fractured. Their youthful ideals were gone. Some had already climbed the social ladder by attaching themselves to the banker they once despised. But not only had their social ideals eroded, but their former friendships were also gone. For example, friends even dueled over a woman. Another example, when Moreau wanted to run for deputy, he spoke at a political rally, claiming some friends would support him. But when the crowd booed him away, not a single friend spoke up for him. When the 1848 revolution came, Moreau felt nothing for the street protests. He was busy seducing women. Between romantic pursuits, he went to the streets and symbolically participated in the revolution. Indeed, he found a few friends in the crowd on the street and learned that Deslauriers had been appointed as a provincial revolutionary commissioner and was about to take up the post. Next, we started with Sora. Although they overthrew the monarch, the people's behavior left Deslauriers utterly disillusioned. He said, "The people just crawl around, groveling 1 minute at Robespierre's feet, the next at the emperor's shoes, then under Louis Philippe's umbrella. These scumbags will swear loyalty to anyone who tosses them a piece of bread." Soon after, Deslauriers was dismissed from his position. Later, he got caught up in arms trading and arrested. After release, the Revolutionary Committee sent him to work in London. He was beaten up in London and returned to Paris all dejected. As the revolution turned against the rising class, their friends started circling back around the old power players. So, Dambruz's place became the political hotspot again. All those once radical youngsters flocked to cozy up to him. And Deslauriers ended up in his circle too. To win over Dambruz, he badmouthed Moreau and plotted with Mrs. Dambruz to push Arnoux out. Even wilder, Deslauriers snuck off to Moreau's hometown, hooked up with old man Roque, and married his daughter. These driven young folks in Paris went from naive students to diving headfirst into the revolution, then saw it fade away. They went through their growth journey, but it wasn't progress or personal growth at all. In fact, morally speaking, this coming-of-age story is really a tale of their moral downfall. Beyond his friends, chasing love was big for Moreau. He got tangled up with 4 different women. Now, let's dive into these relationships. No doubt about it, Moreau was head over heels for Madame Arnoux. Right from the start of the book, when he spotted her on the boat, he was hooked by her looks and grace. The moment Moreau saw Madame Arnoux on the ship, he was captivated by her beauty and demeanor. Once in Paris, Moreau made it his mission to cozy up to Arnoux's art place, turning into a fixture at their home. He saw Madame Arnoux more often, but they never got that close emotionally. He was just another face in the crowd at her place. Once, he accompanied Madame Arnoux shopping. After parting, he felt the entire street was filled with her presence and shadow. Seeing woolen fabrics and gemstone earrings in shop windows, he imagined them adorning Madame Arnoux. Paris felt intimately connected to her. The great city, with its myriad sounds, seemed like a grand orchestra playing softly around him. One day, Arnoux invited friends for Madame Arnoux' birthday party. Near the end, Arnoux grabbed random paper from his pocket to wrap wildflowers for her. Unfortunately, that paper was a love letter from another woman. Madame Arnoux discovered this secret. In the carriage home, she silently wept, then quietly took Moreau's arm beside her. Moreau was deeply moved. Feeling profound pity for her pain, he swore he'd pay any price to help her. Arnaud's lover Rosinette was a socialite. To avoid suspicion, he often dragged Moreau to her place. With Arnoux, Madame Arnoux, and Rosinette, Moreau became an intermediary in this love triangle. He covered for Arnoux while comforting Madame Arnoux, all while freely visiting Rosinette's home. For Moreau, moral issues didn't exist. He was fundamentally a man without principles. He enjoyed Arnoux' recklessness, admired Madame Arnoux' depth, and didn't refuse the excitement around Rosinette. His interactions with Madame Arnoux increased.
When Arnoux' business faltered, Moreau used money meant for his friend's newspaper to pay Arnoux' debts.
Regrettably, during this financial crisis, the Arnoux couple's bond strengthened instead of collapsing, deeply upsetting Moreau. He stopped visiting them until one day, Madame Arnoux came to him. She had co-signed 4 promissory notes for her husband to Dambruz, now overdue. Without prompt repayment, she'd face court. Madame Arnoux begged Moreau to persuade Monsieur Dambruz for a repayment extension. Moreau approached Dambruz and, by agreeing to buy shares in his coal company, resolved her urgent crisis. One day, before the revolution, Moreau finally confessed his love to Madame Arnoux. Touched, she agreed to meet him. Moreau anxiously awaited that day, meticulously decorating his home. On the day of their date, restless, Moreau went to the streets, searching along Madame Arnoux' expected route. Reaching the streets, he saw citizens gathering from all directions singing the Marseillaise. Students shouted, "Long live reform," while troops stood ready. Revolutionary fervor swept through. But Moreau remained indifferent, consumed only by thoughts of his date with Madame Arnoux. The time came, but Madame Arnoux never appeared. Night fell, leaving Moreau wandering alone. Next day, he learned her son fell ill that day. She saw it as divine punishment and regretted their plan. Humiliated and angry, Moreau swore to abandon all hope for love, like leaves swept by a gale. With love gone, he felt strangely free. Inviting Rosinette to dinner, they walked through clashing protesters. Gunfire echoed, people fell bleeding, but they laughed carelessly as if Armageddon couldn't touch their joy. He took Rosinette to the apartment decorated for Madame Arnoux. Revenge for her betrayal. Moreau's feelings for Rosinette weren't purely physical desire. He'd long coveted her luxurious life. At the races, surrounded by noble carriages and admiring crowds, he dreamed. Wasn't this his ideal, dressing fashionably with a beauty in dazzling settings? Compared to the elusive Madame Arnoux, wasn't Rosinette beside him more real? During revolutionary days, street battles intensified. Rebels stormed the palace, toppling the monarchy. Crowds flooded the palace, plundering treasures. Escaping Parisian chaos, Moreau took Rosinette to Fontainebleau. Immersed in forest tranquility, they found bliss. Moreau believed he'd be happy till his dying day, and Rosinette wasn't just a materialistic socialite. She too yearned for stable marriage deep down. She told Moreau about her troubled past, now like a weary bird returning to the forest, finally finding her place in life. Moreau watched her, sensing a uniquely fresh beauty about her. But Madame Arnoux remained Moreau's true love. Rosinette was merely an emotional rebound when his love faltered. Such rebounds included not just Rosinette, but also Old Man Roque's daughter and Madame Dambruz. Old Man Roque hoped his daughter would marry Moreau, likely valuing his family's former noble title. Roque's daughter had always cared for Moreau, and his mother approved this match. Moreau lacked firm will. Though loving Madame Arnoux, her unrequited feelings wounded his pride, breeding weariness. By contrast, Roque's daughter's attentiveness soothed his vanity. For the first time, he felt the joy and fulfillment of being truly loved. Of course, he didn't truly love Roque's daughter. The book notes she only stirred wave-like passions in him. In his heart, chasing pleasure was like surfing. Roque's daughter just one wave among countless others. Ultimately, he dallied with Rosinette while delaying marriage to Roque's daughter. Discovering Moreau's indifference, Roque's daughter returned heartbroken to the country and married Deslauriers. Post-revolution, seeking protection, Moreau frequented the Dombrus' home. Boston, gradually drawn to its refined atmosphere and especially Madame Bruce's charm, he imagined her as his lover, ensuring his rise in Paris, even planning to use their influence to run for deputy again. Despite lacking ambition, his urge to join high society remained powerful, so he lavished attention on Madame d'Ambrose, engineering encounters at theaters, churches, and libraries. Soon, they took walks together under the pretext of exchanging news. Their conversations gradually centered on love. Madame d'Ambrose didn't evoke the intoxicating enchantment that Madame Arnoux did, nor the chaotic joy that Rosinette brought. In her, there was a special charm born from nobility and wealth. Moreau transplanted his romantic fantasies from Madame Arnoux onto Madame d'Ambrose. He reused the sweet nothings he told Madame Arnoux to flatter her, and she accepted his affections, not because she believed in his love, but out of boredom. Growing older, she knew she'd never experience youthful passion again. This might be her last chance at love in her life. During Moreau's secret affair with Madame d'Ambrose, Monsieur d'Ambrose died of an asthma attack. Moreau imagined his blissful marriage to her was about to become real. Just then, Arnoux' investments failed, and Madame d'Ambrose pressured him to repay overdue promissory notes without telling Moreau. Arnoux had no choice but to flee to the provinces with his family to escape debts. Items left behind would be auctioned. On that day, Madame d'Ambrose took Moreau to the auction and decided to bid on an exquisite box once used by Madame Arnoux. Moreau firmly opposed Madame d'Ambrose buying the box, but she ignored him. In his view, Madame d'Ambrose's move carried a hint of humiliation because she knew Moreau still longed for Madame Arnoux, and their own love wasn't solid enough to survive any blow. Afterward, Moreau coldly saw Madame d'Ambrose off alone into her carriage and walked away, never seeking her again. Over a decade passed like this. Moreau achieved nothing. The women he loved left him, his friends scattered. Yet he still frequented social scenes and chased after women. But his constant longing for his first love made other affections seem bland. His fiery desires extinguished, vibrant emotions faded, and his ambitions dwindled. Another decade later, one night in 1867, a woman came to Moreau's door. He opened it to see Madame Arnoux. They smiled at each other, and in that smile, the pains of time and love seemed to vanish. Madame Arnoux shared her life after leaving Paris. They settled in a remote province, living frugally to repay debts. Arnoux was bedridden long-term. Their daughter married, and son joined the military. Madame Arnoux gave Moreau a red purse embroidered with golden palm leaves containing money they owed him. She'd planned to take a walk. Taking his arm, Madame Arnoux reminisced as they walked. She said whenever reading romance novels now, she always thinks of Moreau. She once thought novels exaggerated emotions, but now realizes she's genuinely felt everything described. She recalled the novel's opening, Moreau seeing her read on the ship, wishing she were the heroine. Now, her wish had come true. Back at Moreau's, she removed her hat, revealing white hair, shocking him profoundly. He expected intimacy but restrained himself, fearing disgust or weariness. He also feared tarnishing the beautiful memory she'd left in his heart for years. At 11, they had nothing left to say. Before leaving, she told Moreau, "I'll never see you again. This is my final act as a woman, but my soul stays with you. May heaven bless you." Then she kissed his forehead like a mother, took scissors, cut a lock of white hair as a keepsake. She left. Moreau opened the window. She waved from the sidewalk before boarding a carriage. Moreau knew it was truly over. This scene naturally recalls Flaubert's own story with Elisa. This farewell is essentially Flaubert's emotional self-portrait. 2 years later, Moreau met Deslauriers again, both now in their 40s. They reconciled by the fireplace. Deslauriers married Roque's daughter, but she later eloped with a singer. Deslauriers' political ideals shattered. Working at a law firm now, they laughed at their youthful ambitions. They recalled their first visit to a brothel in school. That day, the sight of a woman's body terrified them, making them flee instantly. Someone witnessed this scene as a joke, spreading it across campus as they each added details. Laughing while recounting, Moreau said, "That was the finest hour of our lives." Des Lauriers responded, "Yes, perhaps it was. That was the finest hour of our lives." With this, the main storyline of Sentimental Education concludes. After its 1869 publication, the novel received poor reception, especially from admirers of Madame Bovary, who found Sentimental Education lacking dramatic intensity. The story flowed plain as water, with unfocused plots and indistinct character psychologies. In this 400-page work, we find neither intense depictions nor legendary twists, nothing violating mundane reality. But over time, recognition of the work's value grew, elevating its critical standing. As novelist Henry James noted, Sentimental Education is an epic of emptiness. He meant it explores themes of emptiness while achieving epic literary stature. Why is this so? Briefly examining three aspects. First, Flaubert portrays young Parisian dream chasers living hollow existences. The novel depicts extravagant scenes like Moreau inheriting his uncle's fortune. After returning to Paris, Arnoux took him to Rosinette's masquerade, where women dressed as peasants or marquises, men costumed as laborers or sailors, wore exotic masks and flamboyant attire, dancing provocatively with exaggerated expressions. Amid wild revelry, Moreau emerged at dawn feeling parched. This thirst transcended physical need. It was spiritual starvation, craving women, luxury, and Parisian high society's abandon. In a drowsy haze, female dancers floated before Moreau's eyes until he sank into unconsciousness. Secondly, Moreau's love for Madame Arnoux overflowed with emptiness. The novel terms it an illusion, like when she asked about his engagement to Roque's daughter. Moreau hastily denied it, confessing, "I sought the world's most beautiful, gentlest, most enchanting thing. I found this ideal in you." Yet defining his love proves elusive. It certainly involved physical desire, but what he craved more was that atmosphere of love, an unreal, beautiful experience. Though living in a metropolis during turbulent times, mid-19th century France, experiencing what's called the Century of Revolution, from 1789 to 1871. Moreau, obsessed with romance, remained indifferent to these epochal shifts. Like a sleepwalking puppet, in that unique time and space, his love detached from all social context. He achieved nothing socially, and his so-called pure love life was equally fruitless. Thirdly, Flaubert's writing itself embodies emptiness. When Moreau first sees Madame Arnoux on the ship, he thinks, "Never seen skin so radiant. Her figure, even her sewing basket, seemed a treasure." And he longed to see her bedroom, all her dresses, meet her acquaintances, revealing fetishistic obsession in his gaze. In Paris, he finally meets her but dares not speak, instead meticulously studying every detail, her body, clothes, each word from her lips feeling wondrously new. The novel writes, Moreau stared at those eyes, unable to look away, his whole soul seeping into her fair skin. Morally, this fetishistic gaze seems base, but Flaubert uses it to show Moreau's paralysis, reducing love to static observation. The longer he stared, the deeper and more enduring his love seemed to become. At the auction's end, Moreau sees Madame Arnoux' clothes tossed about, feathers on her hats snapped. In these scattered treasures, he glimpses the shape of her limbs, the division feeling like vultures picking at her corpse. With Madame Arnoux' belongings strewn everywhere, his gaze ends, shattering his fantasy of preserving love through objects. Moreau aimlessly pursued hopeless love in Paris, wasting half his life. Flaubert offered his character no redemption. Others pursued different goals but met similar defeat, all seemingly controlled by unseen forces, wandering through life. Thus, while the novel seems themeless, its narrative style reveals its core message. Life itself has no essence, no truth, no unified will that shapes our ideal selves. Crucially, Flaubert's narrative contains a conscious critique of realism itself. Flaubert appears as realism's culmination, yet his void effect secretly rebels against its principles. Pre-Flaubert, realist protagonists were chosen representatives, exemplary figures, but Flaubert defied this. As Milan Kundera noted, he escaped dramatic conventions. Sentimental education depicts the mundane with straightforward narration. Unlike realist novels, merging narrator and protagonist, here the narrator alternates between Moreau's perspective and external views, creating narrative fractures that foreshadow modernism. Its novelty and avant-garde nature doomed it to rejection in its own time. Flaubert's friend George Sand understood, comforting him. Today is clearly not the time for sentimental education, or perhaps it came too early. Still, Flaubert built on tradition. The education in the title evokes the European Bildungsroman, traditionally called novels of formation. These depict protagonists entering society, evolving, and shedding innate traits to assimilate. But for Flaubert, education drips with irony and so-called growth. Society's education is merely wasted youth, decaying ambitions, and lost love. The subtitle, A Story of a Young Man, makes this a 150-year-old coming-of-age novel, but it's no inspirational tale.
Yeah.
It chronicles weak wills and life's failures. Youth exists here without fiery hope. Complex characters appear without heroic legends, only mediocre growth. After Flaubert's death, critic Bonneville called it a novel without novelistic elements, as melancholy and confused as the city itself. So why read something that doesn't motivate us? Great literature's hallmark. It questions us eternally, helping us question ourselves. Its timeless dilemmas haunt every era. Our answers reveal human spirit's value. Each generation's response builds upon others, propelling human self-reflection and transcendence. When we recognize fragments of ourselves in its pages, when we ask, who am I who I dreamed of becoming? Literature cracks open our souls, pushing us toward futures forged through reflection. That concludes our exploration of Flaubert's Sentimental Education. Reading notes are below the audio. Until next time.